Okay, we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lymphoma Canada's live Google Plus Hangout. My name is Tracy Ann Curtis. I'm the Regional Manager in Quebec, and I'm delighted to introduce you today to Marita Pohl, who is a clinical counselor with BC Cancer Agency. She's going to speak to us today about fear of cancer recurrence. She's been providing clinical counseling to cancer patients and their families at the BC Cancer Agency on Vancouver Island Centre in Victoria since 2004. After completing her master's in counseling, Marita completed advanced clinical training in emotion-focused therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and trauma therapy. Marita works with people living with all types and stages of cancer and facilitates an ovarian cancer group, a relaxation group, a colorectal cancer group, and online support groups as well. She's passionate about providing cancer care because it's a complex experience that involves healing on so many levels, and there are so many ways that people can grow, learn, and change through this experience. I had the pleasure of meeting Marita at CAPO in April, and so we invited her to participate and share her knowledge with you. So Marita, thank you for joining us, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Tracy Ann, and I'm really glad to be here. I'm one of the facilitators with Cancer Chat Canada, so I had the privilege of leading one of the first online support groups for people living with various different types of blood cancers. So I'm really passionate about trying to provide good information, support, and service to this population. So for whoever's here today, I'm really glad you're here and welcome. The topic I'm going to be touching on today is using trauma theory to understand and manage a fear of a cancer recurrence. So let's move to our second page of the slide, and here's my outline. What my goal is for you today is to leave with some information or perhaps even a perspective on living with a fear of a cancer recurrence that will be useful for you, and to guide you through some strategies or let you know about some strategies that can help reduce that overall fear. I'm going to touch a little bit on trauma theory and some tools and strategies, and I'll guide you through my PowerPoint. I just invite you, if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to type them in, and we'll do what we can to address them. And this has been a really useful perspective for me. It's really changed how I work, and I've noticed the changes with the patients I've worked with in terms of people feeling a sense of, oh, so that's why I'm reacting like this. Maybe I don't feel like such a, one person said to me, I don't feel like such a two-headed freak anymore. And so I hope you leave with a sense of maybe a bit of understanding, maybe a bit of hope, but some ways to work with something, which I would say is maybe it might not be a universal experience for cancer patients, but is an incredibly common experience for cancer patients. So again, welcome, so glad you're here, and I just look forward to seeing what's happening. And we'll just move on to the third slide. So the first thing right out of the gates, I'm just going to talk you through, and this is woven throughout my presentation, are different strategies for you to use. And one of the first strategies is settling, and it takes 20 to 30 seconds. So for whoever's here with us today, I just invite you to do it, and I'm going to do this myself. So I'm going to speak out loud to you as I'm settling myself. So this takes 20 to 30 seconds. So just take a moment to sit down, notice where you're sitting, and allow your body to settle in the chair. So you see Tracy Ann's moving, I'm moving too, because I was sitting in a really uncomfortable way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start feeling into my body. So when I do presentations, I'm often really in a cognitive place. So what I want you to do is just start coming into feeling in your body. Notice, are you comfortable? I often will lean one way or the other, so one side of my body is tighter than the other. So what I've done is I've allowed both sides of my body to settle into the chair. I notice, because I'm doing a presentation, I often get a bit nervous. So I notice my heart's beating a little bit faster, my breath is going a bit faster. So I'm just going to take a second and I'm just going to go, okay. And then I notice my shoulders go down, and then I begin to relax. And then, because a piece of what I want to do here today is I want to connect with you, person to person through this technology, but through kind of a shared experience. And we'll do that better if I'm connected in a more heart way to you. So just coming into this in this moment, noticing your posture, noticing your sitting position, and allowing yourself to be comfortable. So because I talked all the way through this, it took way longer than it should. But really, it's about noticing what's happening in my body right now, allowing myself to get comfortable, and just coming in and settling in a little bit. And that's one of the things that will help us just to begin to reduce the intensity. And so we move on to the next slide. Cancer and trauma. So that's slide 4. So cancer, by many definitions, is stressful or traumatic, and that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of mental disorders, and they have a big definition of what trauma is. But when we're looking at the research for people, for cancer patients, post-traumatic stress disorder, 3 to 4% of cancer patients are diagnosed with PTSD in the early stages of treatment, and up to 35% of patients evaluated after treatment could, to either a partial level or a full level, meet the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And you know, that's the disorder that soldiers coming back from war are often, the old-fashioned phrase or term was called shell-shocked. And for some of you, that may be part of your experience of this cancer came out of left field, it's so scary, and that's just, it's such a common part of the experience, such a normal part. So I'm not saying everybody goes through this experience traumatized. I'm not trying to say that at all. What I'm saying is, at the bare minimum, this is an incredibly stressful and complex experience, and people's responses range from fairly minor to very significant, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder. So we just go on to the next slide. So what is trauma? They are experiences that involve life threat or danger. This is one of my favorite definitions. Traumatic events overwhelm the ordinary systems of care that give people a sense of control, connection, and meaning. They generally involve threats to life or bodily integrity. Tell me a single cancer patient that doesn't really apply to, whether it's due to the diagnosis itself or the treatment. So again, I'm not saying that this is true for everybody, but here's something that's part of the experience that can activate people. So that it's any experience that overwhelms a person's ability to cope, whether that's physically, mentally, or emotionally. And then we just go on to the next slide. For mammals, and I know that's a weird way to say it, but this is one of the useful pieces about trauma therapy, is it talks about how our physiology, how our physical self affects our intellectual and emotional self too. So this is why I think it's quite important. So for mammals, we have built-in drives to protect and defend and seek safety. Most of us have heard of these drives before, like the flight or fight response, but there's actually 3: flight, fight, and freeze. And always easier to type than say. And those are the drives to protect yourself, to run away, to defend, to seek safety with others. And how that works in the body, and I'm not speaking as a physician or a nurse, I'm speaking as a counseling therapist, so I'm speaking more generically. The sympathetic nervous system responds instinctively to create defense, which is flight, mobilization, which is flight, or seeking safety. And so what happens in the body is our nervous system becomes dysregulated, but it does that on purpose so that we have the drives to assist ourselves to get to safety. So that means our stress hormones, our responses are, we have a flood of hormones, things like adrenaline and cortisol and substances like that, which allow us to get the stamina and the energy to protect ourselves. So we want that dysregulation. But after that dysregulation happens, then sometimes people get stuck. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go on to our next slide. So excess survival energy. So if we have these instinctive drives like flight or fight, we're now able to protect ourselves by running away or I'm putting my fists up, or fighting somebody, right? But when you are a cancer patient, you don't typically run away, and you don't tend to sock your oncologist, right? You're going, for most people, they're going to go do the treatment. So what happens is we've made this intellectual decision, but as mammals, we still have this physiological process that's going on. And that can affect how we think, how we feel emotionally, and in our body. So, okay, well, how does it affect how we think? Well, the cortical areas of the brain, they don't function well in traumatic situations because the brainstem and the limbic system take over, and they disrupt our cortical functioning. So what that means is, as we're getting these instinctive drives are getting going for us to protect ourselves, basically the resources that typically go to our brain, which help us focus on things like thinking and problem solving, that doesn't happen as easily and as effectively because our body is focused on just trying to survive. One of the people I did training with, Dr. Sharon Stanley, she had a phrase where she said, the logical brain doesn't play well with the survival brain, and it's so true. Just think back to when you were first diagnosed or first going through treatment. What people will say are, you know, I used to have a great memory. My memory, like, you know, I'm not even doing chemotherapy yet, and I'm leaving my keys in the front door. Why? Because your instinctive drives were threatened, and you've got all this excessive energy that hasn't been discharged from your body yet. So just to know that that's not, again, it's not because you're a two-headed freak, it's because you're a mammal that's had a physiological response to danger or life threat, right? So that's the piece, is there's this underlying process that we don't often acknowledge because we're like, oh, we'll just think about this, we'll problem solve it, we'll make logical choices, but we're not light bulb heads. We are bright mammals, but we exist within a body as well, and so it's important to consider that, those aspects as well. And so we just go on to the next slide. The sympathetic nervous system. So our nervous system, and this is just how I choose to discuss it, again as a therapist, not as a nurse or a physician, that the larger nervous system has two basic parts: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And I kind of think of our nervous system as a thermostat, like it's constantly trying to get us to 72 degrees Celsius. And sometimes we use things like the sympathetic nervous system, which is our gas, which helps us to accelerate so we can get things going, or our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our brakes, which helps things to slow down. So the sympathetic nervous system, it's the system that's in charge of fight-flight response, and it's the part of the system that generates a large amount of energy so that you can run away, so that you can defend yourself. And this is the energy that very commonly gets stuck, where people feel like they're left in an agitated state. So let's just go on to the next slide. And here's what that can look like sometimes: headaches, fast heartbeat, feeling excessively tired, trouble sleeping, dry mouth, pounding heart. I think the pounding heart might be pretty common. Difficulty breathing, stomach upset, sweaty palms, tight muscles, again, also very common. Irritability, inability to concentrate. So in my work here at the clinic, the ones I see the most often are the people talk about a fast heartbeat or a pounding heart, irritability, hard to concentrate, and the muscle tightness. And when I think about that stuff, how I make sense of it, if we look at it from a trauma therapy place, is that's the state of vigilance. Because somebody's been given information that their life is threatened or their body is threatened, as mammals, we stay kind of on high alert. We stay on guard. There's danger there. We've got to try to protect ourselves. And so that's just how the sympathetic nervous system affects us physically, but that can also affect our sense of the world, how we feel and how we think. So if we're highly activated, our problem-solving skills, our memory, our concentration isn't as good as when we're in a calmer place. I worked with this one fellow, he's a lawyer, and he's like, I forgot the name of my niece. And, you know, that really shocked him. And that also, in turn, he'd always been able to count on his mind. And that was a key sense of his identity. So the stress response in him was quite upsetting for him. And for some people, their view of the world may not feel as safe anymore. And that can be pretty scary. And so we move on to the next slide. Parasympathetic nervous system. This is the brakes. In its best form, it's our relaxation response. You know, when you come home after a hard day and you see the people you love the most and your body just goes, ah, that's what the parasympathetic response is. And this part of the nervous system is also responsible for things like rest, digestion, and the other response, which is the freeze response. We're not going to really go into that today, but I just like people to know that that's part of the response. But when we are in that a parasympathetic response, that's when we can most easily engage with each other and feel that sense of safety. So that's why I was telling you about settling. I can better engage with you and connect with you when I'm feeling relaxed. If I'm feeling hyper, if I'm feeling agitated, we're not going to connect that well. And when we feel like we're connecting with somebody, we are feeling a sense of safety, and our whole system begins to calm down. And we're just going to move on to the next slide. So here's how trauma and fear of recurrence, in my limited opinion, here's some of the links. So physically, it's just a really common response to be afraid after you've had a cancer diagnosis. And physically, you can feel that agitation and looking for threat. Again, not everybody, but it can be a part of the response. And that this is just a normal physiological response of being a human or of being a mammal. Psychologically, this is how a lot of people say it to me is, you know, it was like the rug was pulled out from underneath me, or the inconceivable has happened. Something that was so unthinkable. And if the unthinkable can happen once, sure as heck can happen again. And what I like about trauma theory is it provides a really broad lens that talks not only about the body, but our psychological being. And it's just so applicable to so many of us. And if it fits for you and it's useful for you, fantastic. And if it doesn't, I also just invite you to let it go. And then we go on to the next slide, cancer and trauma. After you've been diagnosed, you then get on that kind of wheel, that fast moving of moving through your treatment. Your daily life gets filled up with going to appointments, receiving treatment, experiencing symptoms, getting tests, monitoring, and then, for some people, you're going to be discharged from the clinics. Right? Now, okay, we've done what we can do. Now you try to go back to your normal life. And then this is where people sometimes really begin to struggle. Okay, so I'm not a cancer patient anymore, but who am I now? And I'm not going to be as actively surrounded by my care team anymore. And cancer's happened once, it could possibly happen again. And so people talk about it as living with a sword over your head. And I think, again, that's an incredibly common part of the experience. And it's how if we can just acknowledge, okay, so I'm not being a two-headed freak. This is a pretty normal part of the experience. So how do I work with it so that it doesn't hijack my life? And I can work with it as it comes back and refocus and get back to what really matters. So we'll just go on to the next slide. Oh, look at this. It's 12:20. I'm 1/3 of the way through. Yay, us. Wait time management. Excellent. So what I'm going to do next is it's one more exercise, and I'm going to do this with you. I'm going to do some grounding, and I'll talk it through, and it's going to be a little bit longer because I'm doing it with you. But I just invite you to notice what this is like, experiment with it, adapt it, and make it your own. So what I like about, I'm doing a form of physical grounding with you, and what I like about this type of physical grounding is it takes us out of the mental flurry that could be happening, like when our mind is going in, like I can hear it in my voice, I'm already talking really fast again. So I'm glad I'm going to do some grounding with you. It takes us out of the mental flurry and brings us back into the moment through our body in a fairly safe way. So let's just start. Again, let's start with settling. Okay, notice your body in the chair and get comfortable. Okay. Letting my back relax. I'm even again. And just start feeling your feet on the floor. And then very lightly press your heels in, and then the balls of your feet. And then very slowly start rocking your feet back and forth. And it's not a big exaggerated movement, rather it's a kind of a soft, gentle micro movement so that people can see your feet moving, but they're not rocking in a really big exaggerated way. So just do that for a moment, and then notice what happens as you do that, as you focus on feeling your feet, the experience of your feet moving. And then take in the awareness that right here, right now, your feet are on the floor. And I know that's a weird thing for me to say, but for a lot of people, they feel like a cancer diagnosis was like the rug being pulled out from under them. So notice, the rug hasn't been pulled out. The floor is right there. Feeling into the support of the floor. And letting your legs just really rest their weight on your feet on the floor. And then start noticing along the back of your thighs to your sit bones, the contact there between your body and whatever you're sitting on. So I'm sitting in a chair, you might be sitting on a couch or a stool. See if you can really feel into the contact beneath the back of your thighs and your sit bones. For a lot of us, we often have a lot of muscular tension. So just notice if your legs, the thigh muscles have released and if they've let go and they're just resting loosely and comfortably. And then feel into those sit bones. A lot of us will sit forward or back, but see if you can find a sitting position that allows the full weight of your torso to really rest on those sit bones. They're fantastic bones. They were built to hold your weight and a whole bunch more. So allowing the weight of your torso to just really settle and sink into those bones. And at the same time noticing your chair. This was built to hold and support your body. See if you can let the weight of your body be held by the chair. And then notice your hands, wherever they are, if they're on the desk or if they're on your thighs or wherever they are. Just see if you can let your fingers touch whatever's closest. So I'm wearing a skirt and I can feel the nubbly texture of the knit material. I can feel the warmth of my thighs through the fabric. So just feeling for temperature, feeling for texture. And then notice along your back, if you're sitting in a chair or couch, see if you can let your back rest, feeling into the places where your body and the chair are connected. And again, letting the weight of your back be held and supported by the chair. And then finding that resting position for your neck and your head, where the weight of your head feels very light and effortless for your neck. And then notice and feel into your mouth and jaw. And as I do this, I then do a big sigh, because that's just how my body responds. See if you can allow your mouth to hold open just by a millimeter or two, so that your jaw loosens and relaxes, because that's a place where we will often brace. So just notice that. And that's a form of physical grounding. And really what you're doing is you're coming into awareness from toes all the way up, feeling into the points of contact, slowing down and coming into the moment through the sense of physical sensation, of feeling. And then we just move on to the next slide. And this is one of the things that I've really found helpful for people, and it's really helped me with the people I've worked with, is fear of a cancer recurring, of your cancer recurring, is so common, and it is so normal to being diagnosed and treated with cancer. Some of the research I looked at showed between 70 to 89% of cancer patients report fear of recurrence. And it could even be higher than that. I'm not saying it happens for every single human being, but it happens for many. And that it's really common to notice fear of recurrence the first 1 to 3 years after treatment. And one of our nurses here, and I noticed this in my practice here, said after you get a few health checkups that are, you're okay, it's fine, then some of that physical vigilance, that nervous system muscular tension begins to let go of, okay, can I begin to trust again? But a lot of people talk to me the first 3-6 months after cancer treatment is finished, is that headache metastases to my brain? Is that a sore leg? Has it spread to my bones? And I think unless you've had a life-threatening disease or experience, a lot of people will kind of poo-poo that or laugh that off of, oh, don't be a drama queen. But when you've been given information of you've had cancer, I don't think that's an unusual response. So just inviting you to be gentle with yourself when you have those reactions. So we'll just move on to the next slide. So when do I notice with the people I work with that this typically fear of recurrence tends to come up most often? When people are experiencing symptoms. So like we just talked about the headache, bone ache, feeling sick or injured in ways that are familiar, like for example when they were first diagnosed, or new. When they're going to medical appointments, whether it's at your oncology clinic, your cancer clinic, when you're going for scans, medical tests, getting results or procedures. A lot of people talk about how difficult the waiting is between having a test and getting the results. Or when a friend, family member, or a famous person gets diagnosed with cancer, some people can get really triggered then. I remember when Jack Layton died, there were a few of the people I worked with that really made them agitated again. Anniversary dates from your own cancer experience. And I think it's so easy for us to say, well, my treatment's done. Why am I being bothered? Or why is my wife being bothered, or brother, or my kid? Well, it's a really common part of the experience that in these kind of situations, these are triggers, again, for fear of recurrence. And again, it's fairly common. And so I'm just going to take a drink. And we go on to the next slide. This is just a general, and I'm going to use the word treatment plan, and again, I'm not using that like a nurse or a physician would, but giving you some basic points to consider for yourself, your own treatment plan for how do I manage not letting this fear take over my life. Well, we've done 2 strategies that are easy to use, and they're ways to bring that stress level down and bring you into the moment. But here's some of the broad strokes for you to consider. what do I need to do to decrease that nervous system activation, that high sympathetic activation? Sometimes that's about exercise, getting it out of your body. Sometimes it's about sometimes it's really about using relaxation techniques and things like that. But how am I getting this energy out of my body? And with the people I work with, we often look at how exercises worked into their average week. Sometimes it's around counseling to kind of process the experience and try to integrate it. Sometimes it's about when people have really a lot of agitation in their arms or in their legs, we do different exercises with that. Another thing is looking at increasing your parasympathetic activation. And really what I mean by that is, what are you doing every single week that brings you back to that place of deep safety, that place I described of the, I'm with my people and I'm okay. You need to have that in your week several times, just like you need to have it, getting the exercise several times a week as well. And I also think information, like, yeah, I'm a counselor and I love counseling and talking things through, but I'm also an intellectual person too. I like information. I'm practical. I want to understand. So I think it's important to know things like, oh, okay, I've got a scan coming up. Chances are the week or two before that I might be getting more agitated, and then while I'm waiting for my results, okay, that's going to be part of my experience. So I'm not going to beat myself up. I just need to do some more self-care, and I'm going to tell the people around me, this is a really common experience for cancer patients. I just want you to know about it because I might need to talk. I may need my people around me, things like that. And then this is an important point for me, is wanting your values to guide your own treatment plan for how you work with fear of recurrence. There isn't one right way to do this. Like, not all cancer patients need to go to support groups. Support groups aren't for everybody. For you, if it's gardening, do your gardening. If it's your church choir, do that. If it's taking care of your grandkids, do that. It's whatever brings you back to that sense of, because when our body is in that place, we have more resources for healing. One of our researchers in the building was talking about, he looks at the immune response to cancer. He was saying that T cells, and those are the cells that attack things or go after things like cancer, one of the things that can dampen their production is cortisol, and that's the stress hormone. So again, this is part of why I'm encouraging you to come back to whatever creates the response. Because the less time you spend there, the more resources your body has to do its healing work. And it's also just a much better way to live. If you're stressed all the time, that's really unpleasant. And it keeps your body in a state of agitation, and there's likely a high stress response, and that means your body isn't at that optimal place to do the healing work that it needs to do. And for me, I like having kind of a metaphor or a focus. And the one I like right now is the idea of nourishment. So that when I look at my day, or I look at my week, or I look at my life in a broader perspective, I'm asking myself the question of, what's nourishing to me in my life? You don't have to use the word nourishing. You may use the word peace. It might be about energy. It might be about healing. It might be about health. It might be about well-being. So that you have this type of focus in your life and you review, do I have enough that replenishes me? So that knowing that stress just happens in people's lives, but if we can balance that out with things that bring us pleasure, bring us joy, bring us peace, then our whole life is more enjoyable and a life well lived, and it's in a more resourced place for our body to do its healing work. And then just remembering that fear of recurrence, and again, this varies by individual. For some people, it may be a smaller issue. For some people, it might be more the first 1 to 3 years. Some people say they struggle with it for many years, and some people say it was more just the first year. And then you're going to fall somewhere in that continuum, and I don't know where that is, but just remembering that this fear of recurrence can be triggered over years. So let's go into the next section. Parasympathetic breathing. So this isn't the typical deep belly breathing. Rather, it's a yoga breathing, and I give credit to Misha Buteau. She's one of our hospice counselors here in Victoria. She was really clear with me that she didn't invent it. It's a type of yoga breathing, but I don't have an original source to cite of who created this or copyrighted it at the very least. But let me just talk you through it. I really like parasympathetic breathing because what I notice with myself when I use it and with some of the people I work with, it's one of those styles of breathing that's so gentle, so easy, because you're not trying to change anything, but it can almost create like a trance-like state. And a lot of people I know can use this to help fall asleep. So what I'm going to get you to do with parasympathetic breathing is I'm going to get you just to focus at the back of your nostril. So if you were to stick your baby finger in your nostril, really you're just going in by maybe 1/4 of an inch at the back of your nostril. That's where you're going to focus. And you're not going to really do anything. When you're doing parasympathetic breathing, what you're doing is you're focusing on the experience of the air moving in your nose and out your nose. So I'm just going to guide you through this. So as you focus on the back of your nose, you're feeling the back of the fleshy part there. What I'm going to ask you to do is just for the next maybe minute, and I'll just talk you through it, focus on the feeling, the experience of the air as it moves in your body. So I'm just doing it with you right now. So as I'm breathing in, I can feel the air moving in my nostril. And the first thing I notice is that the air in the room is cooler than the temperature inside my nose. And then that inner nasal skin, it's tender and it's damp. So it feels different than when air moves over any other part of skin. It somehow feels a little bit more intense than air moving over anywhere else. So I'm just going to get you just to focus for a few seconds, and I'll let you know when to stop, on the feeling and on the experience of the air moving in your nose. And then I'm going to get you to shift your attention to the feeling of the air on the out-breath, just following that experience. So the first thing, again, I always notice is how when the air is leaving my nose, it's warmer than it was when it came in. And it feels warmer than the air in the room. And then again, noticing how that warm air feels as it moves over that tender, damp skin in your nose. And then I always notice, and I don't notice this with the in-breath, but I notice it on the out-breath, that sometimes I can feel the air moving my nose hair. So just take a few seconds, and I'll let you know when to come back, following the feel of the air on the out-breath. And then, on those days where my mind is really busy, I still like to do this breathing, but I've got to do it in a slightly different way. What I'll do is I'll use a mantra or a phrase that I say to myself, either out loud or in my head, that helps really anchor my mind. Because if my mind's busy, it wants something to do, so I don't resist that, I give it something. And so what I'll do, and I'll get you just to experiment with this and see how it feels. Breathing in, air cool. Breathing out, air warm. In, cool. Out, warm. In, cool. Out, warm. And just do that for a few seconds on your own, and I'll bring you back. And again, everybody's different. We all have different preferences. Some people like to follow the in-breath. Some people like to follow the out-breath. Some people like to do the in, cool, out, warm. It doesn't really, one of those isn't better than the other. Rather, follow the one that feels easiest for you. If it feels easy, you're more likely to use it. Or natural might be a better word. And so we just switch to the next slide. And then we'll switch one more because we just finished that one. And now we're on more tools and strategies. So our next section is going to be a lot more strategy focused. I really just wanted to give you some broad strokes on trauma theory, which is just saying that when there is a threat to physical integrity or life, that there is a physiological response that happens. That response affects our thinking, it affects our feelings, our perception of the world, and it affects our body. And for a lot of people, that can come up not only during diagnosis and treatment, but people can struggle with that after treatment. And it's kind of a time when people are beginning to make sense of that threat to bodily integrity or the changes there, threat to life, and the potential future threat and how people manage that as they're being monitored. So we're going to touch on some information and practical tips. And this, I got to give credit where credit's due. This is all created by the top one. It's from me and the people I work with, all my patients and volunteers. They're like, oh, you forgot about this one. So I try to add them. Naming the elephant in the room. One piece of CBT on engaging the fear and problem solving. Some emotion-focused therapy around coaching. And I've already done some of the body-focused approaches with the settling, the grounding, and the breathing. And so we go on to the next slide, number 20. So this is what a lot of people talk about, sometimes during treatment and after treatment, dealing with those comments. You're so strong. Why aren't you back to work yet? Oh, my aunt died of that. My friend cured that cancer with bamboo. And I just put bamboo in there because it made me chuckle. But people, when they find out you have cancer, it opens up their stories, or you can get some really insensitive remarks. And these are the ones my patients tell me about most often. When I hear people talk to me about, I'm not strong or brave. I didn't have a choice. What are you talking about? If I could run away, I would. Why aren't I back to work? That real dichotomy between what a person looks like on the outside and what feels like and what's happening on the inside. Particularly with cancer-related fatigue, it's not visible to the rest of the world. Or if you didn't lose your hair due to chemo, that's one of the more obvious things that gives some people a bit of a break from those kind of comments from people. But if your chemo didn't make you lose your hair or you had radiation, you may not have lost hair. And so part of working with that, just knowing that that happens, is so common, and it can be very triggering for people. It can be undermining, it can be stressful, and it's already a stressful time, is coming up with some pat phrases. And this can be hard. We're not necessarily great at asserting ourselves as a people. But some of the pat phrases we've talked about are, thank you for letting me know about your aunt, but I find hearing about other people's experiences with cancer is just too much for me right now. And I think sometimes when you're particularly new out of treatment, that can be true for people, and that's okay. I don't think most people, if they knew they were overwhelming you, would want to do that. But your story taps them into their memory and the stories of the people they know and love. Um, my healthcare team and I have a treatment strategy that I'm confident in. So what happens for a lot of people is they get approached about, oh, well, I use this, or are you trying what they're doing in Germany? Are you trying this supplement? Are you doing that? And so people often feel like they've got to justify, or they're pressured to respond to that or check it out. And so that can be one of those responses of, you know what, I've got a treatment strategy with the people I want on my team, and that's what I'm sticking to. Or things like, can you tell my Auntie Jan to stop saying, oh, poor you? That's something people say a lot, is if one more person approaches me with that hangdog face, I'm going to start throwing stuff. And I talk about this here. We talk about as part of the larger team with nurses and docs too, about healing from cancer isn't about healing from an incision. It's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more complex. It's a lot more profound than that. It can be physical. It can be psychological. It can be about your relationships. It can be about your sense of spirituality or life perspective. And I think it's an important piece for all of us to be educating people of, you know what, just the treatment's done, but that's only one part of the healing. And this is hard because sometimes when we feel like we've been leaning on our family for a while, we try to protect the people who've been caring for us, but it can be really helpful to them to know what our needs are and what our limits are, what our preferences are. So, and I think it's fairly true for a lot of people of, I don't know what to say to you. I don't know what's right. I don't know what's wrong. I don't know what's going to upset you, and I'm scared, so I'm either going to shut up and have nothing to do with you, or I might offend you. So a piece of it may be like, well, right now I don't want to talk about the cancer, or right now I do, or can you tell Auntie Jan to stop saying, oh, poor you? I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me. And I think what a lot of people learn is our people, our support networks, we may not have known this before unless we've gone through something really difficult before, that people's abilities to show up really varies, and how they do that really varies. Sometimes people will walk away because it's just so scary for them or stressful. Some people will get really over-involved. Some people will show up. I like also to look at the different ways people show up. Sometimes people show up in the more instrumental or practical ways, like those are the ride givers and the casserole makers. And sometimes people can show up in the I can talk to you about that stuff. And you don't necessarily find those two abilities within one person. You can, but sometimes, like, I will not be the casserole maker, but I will be the talker. Definitely won't drive you, but we can have some of those scary conversations. And other people in my life can do the rides and the casseroles. And this is the piece I like to touch on. There's a book called Trauma and Recovery, and if you're really newly out of treatment, I wouldn't recommend it. It can be a difficult read, but Judith Herman talks about within our species, there can be a real limited capacity for ongoing support of pain, grief, and struggle. Sometimes people will hear, it's time for you to move on. That's enough. Aren't you done yet? Treatment's done. And this isn't unique to cancer. It's people with a variety of struggles experience this too. So that's something that's out there in our society and isn't necessarily uncommon, and it happens in a variety of areas as well. And so let's just shift on to the next slide. And this is a slide that it's got Victoria-based information on it, so it's probably not going to be relevant to a lot of you. But after I did my first Fear of Recurrence workshop, I went and grabbed a bunch of patients that I knew really well, and I said, okay, This is your opportunity to help me make this a better workshop. What did I miss? What was good, bad, all that stuff. And what they said to me is, Marita, you didn't name the elephant in the room. Okay, the elephant in the room around fear of recurrence is that this cancer might recur and it might end my life. I might die. And I don't say that lightly, and I say that with a tremendous amount of compassion and respect. For some people, it's more what will happen to me? Will I suffer? Will I have pain? Where will my care take place? How will my family cope? So part of what I do in my local presentations is talk about the services, because if we don't know we're going to be taken care of or our people are going to be taken care of, that can be incredibly stressful. So here are the services in Victoria, and they're the end-of-life services. There's People's GP. The Victoria Hospice has an inpatient unit, and they also have a palliative response unit for those people who want to die at home. Nurse and physicians will help people manage any sort of symptoms. It might be pain, nausea, things like that in their home. We also have the home and community care nursing through VIHA, Vancouver Island Health Authority, and they often do symptom management in the home. They're the eyes of the physicians in the home, so it helps people to maintain independence and quality of life in the home. And then there's also us at the BC Cancer Agency. We provide palliative treatment in terms of medical treatment. And then there's also our counseling and nutrition department, our librarian that provides services to people at whatever stage. So that's an important piece of sometimes the people in our lives want us to stay super positive. But what we need to do sometimes is to talk about the what if. And sometimes it's in the talking about the what if, and I don't mean endlessly, but talking about it a few times reduces our level of stress and fear. So now we go on to the next slide. Here are the strategies that don't work, and there's research on this too. Total avoidance and denial. The best way to create a phobia is avoidance, just so you know. So it doesn't work well. Ruminating and daydreaming, isolating yourself, and prolonged worst case thinking, those don't work well, particularly long term. So I'm going to just touch in on, and I'm just looking at the time, we're on slide 24, and of my active slides, that goes up to slide 30. Okay, so we're doing okay time-wise. So I think part of about naming the elephant is critically engaging the fear. And just to confirm, we're on slide 24. And this is a cognitive behavioral strategy. And what does that mean? Well, asking questions like, is the fear true? Well, can my cancer recur? Yes, that's true. It can recur. And that's a pretty scary thought. But then we have to shift into, are there any information, resources that I need? What do I have control over, and what do I don't have control over? And I think these questions are best asked by ourselves to ourselves, because they can be really offensive questions when asked by others to us. So I encourage you to ask this of yourself. Is the fear true? Do I need any additional information or resources? So that might be looking at research articles. What do I need to do? Who can I ask for help? What do I have control over? What do I not have control over? And I'm just going to speak to the last point there. Fear, anxiety is basically fear that's run amok and has been around for a while. One of the ways we need to work with it, and this is so basic, and it sounds so basic, but it can be a struggle to do because it requires a fair amount of focus and keep coming back to it, is thought stopping. So I put a link there for you to check out on what thought stopping is and how to do it. But fundamentally, I would boil it down to noticing, okay, I'm in this place where the fear is running amok again, and I'm in the future, and I'm thinking worst case scenarios. what I need to do is bring myself back to the moment. I need to stop the thought process and look at what is it that I need to do. So when you start worrying or noticing yourself doing that, I like to do it by grounding yourself first or settling, and then shifting your focus. And that shifting your focus might be with something like going for a walk, calling somebody, reading, journaling, doing a puzzle or relaxation tape. It doesn't matter what you do, it just matters that you do it. So let's shift to our next slide. And here's an example. So an example of critically engaging our fear. Okay, so something that's triggered it is you may be experiencing a certain symptom. Well, probably one of the things you can do is looking at what's your symptom, and then monitor it over several days up to 2 weeks. Is the symptom still there? Keeping track of it. When do you notice it? What is it like? Has it become more? Has it become less? Are these symptoms similar to what you experienced the first time? Are they common symptoms? For example, Ovarian Cancer Canada has a wonderful list of common symptoms for ovarian patients. Are these one of those kind of symptoms, the common ones? Are they a symptom you've experienced before? You can speak to a medical librarian, or like for example, Lymphoma Canada. Whatever resources they have online or in their library. What are the common symptoms for your type of cancer? And if the symptoms persist more than 2 weeks, then you follow up with your GP, and then your GP either addresses that with you or gets you to address that with the oncologist. You can do things like look at prevention and recurrence literature, looking at food and diet, weight, supplements, complementary and alternative medicines. And people may have other thoughts as well. The key thing is to engage it, and while it's useful, what do I need to do? What's the fear telling me? Well, it's telling me that I'm scared. So, am I scared because I'm feeling something? Well, if you're feeling something, begin to track it. Are you scared because you're feeling isolated? If you're isolated, then you seek social support. What's the fear telling you, and engaging that? And then we move on to our next slide. This is more on emotion coaching. And one of the things I encourage people is to allow some time, it might be every day, every other day, a couple times a week, to have worry time. It's unrealistic to think that somebody who's had cancer and is going through all these experiences after the fact isn't going to be afraid sometimes. Of course you are. What we do is we just want to put some boundaries on it so it doesn't take over your life. Because fear and anxiety can do that. And particularly when people are in the first few months after treatment, you're getting used to what does my body feel like and how does it react now that I've gone through this kind of treatment, because your body has changed. So one of the things I'd encourage you to consider and experiment was giving yourself 15 minutes, no more than 15 per day. And if it comes up again at other times, and it's almost guaranteed to, then you're kind of talking to yourself saying, this isn't my worry time, I'm going to put this in a box and I'm going to come back to it during my worry time. And so how you work with the fear is notice, where are you feeling the fear in your body? What I missed is, first of all, get grounded and settled first. Do that, and then notice, where's the fear in my body? So when I'm feeling afraid, I often feel it as a clenching in my gut. So what you do is you may feel it in different places. You may notice it in your legs, your arms, your jaw, your chest. It doesn't matter where it is, but notice, where do I feel this in my body? And just pay attention to it for a while. Notice, is there information for you there? Is it telling you that I'm feeling lonely, that I'm needing help, I'm needing support? Is it telling me that there's some symptoms and I need to tell them to somebody? I need to know that my care team's there for me. You're afraid for a really valid reason. So it's not about shutting yourself up or shutting you down, but rather being productive with what you're feeling and making use of it without the fear gathering momentum and taking over in terms of taking over a whole bunch of your time. So acknowledge it, express it, breathe it, let it hang out for a bit. A lot of people experience this. Some of the people who are here right now are experiencing it. So feel your feet on the floor and just be gentle with yourself for a moment. This is really common. It's a scary experience. And just notice what the information is. Notice if there's an impulse. That impulse might be to connect. If the impulse is to run away, maybe the right thing to do is to go for a walk, but do it mindfully, feeling into your legs and feet. Some people will do things like use a grounding object. They might do some deep breathing exercises or the parasympathetic exercises. The key is to notice it, sit with it for a few minutes, and then come back to what do I want to focus on now? And then go on to our next slide. One of the volunteers I work with picked this quote, and I think it's really bang on for some people. It's from Dune by Frank Herbert. Fear is the mind killer. It is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. When it has gone past, I will turn and see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. And I think that's one of the pieces around the emotion coaching is if we get out of the feelings way and just allow ourselves to feel it for a few minutes, what tends to happen is the feeling shifts and changes. We can breathe gently. We can comfort ourselves. We can just follow the feeling if that's possible for you in the moment. And then the feeling does begin to shift and change. Okay, so we go on to the next slide. This is the 5-question check-in, and it's from a book called Picking Up the Pieces by McGee and Scalzo. And it's a wonderful survivorship book. It's really practical. It's got lots of shared stories in it, but a lot of practical pieces of information, and I recommend it to a lot of patients. This is something I'd encourage you to do pretty much every day the first several months after treatment to help you transition into this new reality you live in, living with having experienced cancer and cancer treatment. That causes changes in your body and your sense of the world, your sense of yourself. And here's a way to begin to reconnect with your body, your sense of self. And the questions are, what's happening in my body? How am I feeling emotionally? When I let my thoughts wander, what do I find myself thinking about? Who did I connect with today? What gave me a sense of peace? It's just a really useful tool to keep coming back to on a daily basis. You get a sense of knowing yourself better, where you're at, where your mind's going, and the pieces that really work for you, like if you're not connecting with people several days in a row, you need to change that. If you're not connecting with a sense of peace every once in a while, you're going to want to work on that. So it helps identify ways your strategy isn't working for you. So we move to the next, slide. The general strategies, being physically active, it helps in so many ways. It can help with stress, it can help with depression. There's a wonderful document by a GP on YouTube about exercising 4 times a week for up to 20 minutes, and literally hundreds of ways it helped our health and well-being. And I encourage you to take a look at it. But like anything, when I say something like that, I've got to add a caveat. Any new exercise plan should be discussed with your doctor or trainer to determine if it's appropriate for you. So example, really bad knee or foot issues, walking may not be the right one for you, right? So thinking about what is right for you in particular. because there isn't a one right strategy for everyone. Being informed, learning what you can do, using resources for support and information. Human beings, we are wired for connection. So allowing yourself to seek connection, hearing other people's stories, and it doesn't necessarily have to be related to the cancer. It could, again, be through your volunteer community, through your family, through your church community, whatever's right for you. Doesn't have to be cancer related. Relaxation and stress management exercises. There's some research coming out on a gratitude practice, and this has always made sense to me, but it just adds a little bit more oomph to it when there's research behind it. That at the end of the day, if you are saying, here are the 3 things that I'm grateful for today, that there is some research that shows that improves people's overall happiness. But the key thing is you can't be sneaky with this. It has to be real and valid to that day, meaning you can't just always say, I'm happy today for my family. I'm happy today for my health. What were you truly happy for today? So today what I was happy for is my friend texted me in the morning and said, good luck with your presentation. Don't worry, the technology will be fine. I saw Tracy and she's so fun, and my connection with her, that's what I'm grateful for. And then I've got the sweet tea here today. And I just love how creamy and sweet it is, and that feels good. So see what I mean by how today, this moment that was? So not these broad, generic things. Focus on health and wellness, not illness. If you can let go of the cancer focus, I think cancer is a filthy thief. And it's really important that we don't let it steal any more of your time or your oxygen. And so sometimes people will have a health focus, but sometimes, again, that's a really sneaky, subversive way of saying cancer. So I don't know that I'd encourage you to focus on health, but find a word that isn't code for cancer. That's why I like the words like nourishment or healing, or for you it might be health, that's okay, but just make sure it's not code for cancer. And then here's the last slide. Just want to let people know about 2 online resources. One is Alistair Cunningham's Healing Journey website. It's a PDF and an online program. And Rob Rutledge's online program. It's a skills-based healing program as well. Great resources, free. So if that's right for you, go ahead, use it. So I went over by 10 minutes. That's not too bad. But what we have now is some time for questions and comments and discussion.
Does anyone have any questions for Marita? Marita, you're so thorough with your experience and sharing that there appears to be no questions today. But I did wanted to make a couple of comments about your presentation and what my takeaways from it were.
Sure.
And I love the fact that you said you gave permission to people to feel like they're not a two-headed freak. You validated them, and I think that's really worthwhile. And I love that you kept repeating the message to be gentle with yourself. And I think one of the most important aspects of it is to give that fear that you have, that a cancer patient has, a voice, and to acknowledge the elephant in the room, but to give that elephant some boundaries, some fences. And I love that you said cancer is a filthy thief, but not to let it, take over your life and everything. So those are my takeaways, and I want to thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your experience with us, and for letting people sort of feel normal about their fear of cancer recurrence.
Well, can I just talk about some of the points you made a little bit? I think people so often feel isolated. And the truth is, yes, we're all unique individuals, but there's a lot of commonalities in the experience because it is what it is. And how, and this is because I'm a bit of a smart aleck, I say this to my patients all the time, but if beating people up really helped, I would have multiple bats in my office. It doesn't. It doesn't. And what it does is it puts us under more stress and pressure. And what does that do? It only makes our thinking worse. It makes our bodies more uncomfortable and stressed. And it really puts our mood really low. So I think the gentleness is a really important piece for me, because if we can say, okay, this is really normal and I'm not alone with this, I think it helps us to access more resources within ourselves and clarity and around us. Just my thought.
That's a great thought. So thank you so much, Marita. We hope you have some other insight to afford us in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.